Have you ever felt a sudden quiet knowing? A nudge you couldn't explain? Perhaps it happened while you were alone at the kitchen sink or driving with the radio off. You weren't asking for guidance, and yet something inside stirred. A voice not your own. Something subtle but deeply personal that, right there, may have been the voice of God. Not with thunder or spectacle, but in the quiet whisper of your intuition. St. John Paul II believed deeply in the interior life, the sacred, silent space within each person where God gently speaks. In his teachings, he often emphasized conscience not just as a moral compass, but as the most secret core and sanctuary of a man, where he is alone with God, whose voice echoes in his depths. It is within that sanctuary that intuition arises, not just a gut feeling, not just instinct, but a deeply spiritual response attuned to something higher. For many adults, especially in the later stages of life, this voice becomes clearer. After the storms of youth, after decades of trying, failing, learning, and enduring, we begin to hear more in the silence. We notice how our heart moves when something feels off. We sense when a decision violates more than logic. It violates something sacred within us, but we've also learned to second-guess it, to silence it with busyness, logic, or fear of being wrong. We live in a culture that prizes external validation over internal clarity. And yet, so often, when we look back on our biggest regrets, the ones that haunt us late at night, we knew. Deep down, we knew. John Paul II never spoke of intuition as magic or superstition. For him, it was part of the soul's communication with God, a sign that we are made in his image, capable of being moved by divine impulse. Our intuition, especially when shaped by prayer, suffering, and humility, becomes a vessel. It's not infallible, but it's holy. If this reflection has already touched your heart, subscribe to the channel and share in the comments. What part spoke to you the most? Now, let's continue. One of the most misunderstood ideas in modern life is that conscience is merely a burden, a source of guilt, a set of internal rules that restrict our freedom. But St. John Paul II saw it differently. He believed conscience was not a cage, but a call, not just to morality, but to meaning, to dignity, to God. In his encyclical Veritatis Splendor, John Paul II wrote that conscience is where man discovers a law which he has not laid upon himself, but which he must obey. This law is not an external imposition, it's a recognition of something truer, deeper, already written in our hearts. It's intuition illuminated by divine truth. And when we ignore that, when we silence it, we begin to feel a slow disconnection from ourselves. Many people in midlife and beyond know this feeling all too well. We've compromised ourselves, sometimes subtly. A job we stayed in too long, a silence we kept when we should have spoken, a relationship we knew wasn't right, but we couldn't let go. At the time, the decision seemed rational, even responsible. But something in us flinched. That flinch was God's voice, not angry, not punishing, but calling us back. Too often we associate divine communication with extremes, visions, miracles, signs in the sky. But John Paul II reminds us that God speaks most often in the interior space of conscience, not to control us, but to invite us into a life that reflects who we truly are. Think of your conscience not as a spotlight on your failures, but as a compass toward your fulfillment. Your intuition is part of that compass. It's why certain choices feel heavy and others feel light. It's why some opportunities may look good on paper, but leave us restless. God is not trying to trick us. He is always inviting, never forcing. And when we tune in, we begin to hear not just what's wrong, but what's right, what's true, what's ours. You're not too old to listen. In fact, the older we get, the clearer the call becomes. In the first half of life, we are trained to respond to noise. Deadlines, alarms, alerts, responsibilities. Life moves fast, and we learn to measure meaning through productivity. But somewhere along the way, especially in the quiet moments that come with aging, when the house empties, careers slow, or loved ones pass, we are confronted with silence. And that silence can feel uncomfortable, even frightening. But St. John Paul II saw silence differently. To him, stillness was not emptiness, it was sacred space, a space where God speaks not through words but through presence. In many of his writings, he pointed to the example of Mary, who pondered all these things in her heart. She listened, she waited, she trusted. And in that trust, something divine unfolded. Intuition requires that same stillness. It cannot be forced or rushed. It does not shout. And yet, in a world that often mistakes stillness for passivity, many of us ignore these deeper stirrings. We brush them off as sentimentality. We tell ourselves we're overthinking. But the truth is, some of our deepest insights only emerge when the external noise fades and the internal voice has room to rise. How often have you noticed something subtle, a glance, a word, a feeling, and it stayed with you for days? Not because it was loud, but because it struck a deeper chord. That's how God speaks, not in chaos, but in clarity, not in urgency, but in timelessness. The challenge, especially for older adults who are transitioning into a slower rhythm of life, is to trust that the stillness is not a sign of fading relevance, but of deepening purpose. It is in this space that intuition becomes louder, not in volume, but in significance. We begin to feel what matters, what was illusion, what is calling. As John Paul II once said, "Be not afraid. Do not be afraid of the silence. Do not be afraid of the voice you hear in it, because that voice, more often than not, is divine." There's a quiet crossroads many of us encounter in life, moments when we sense a shift, a decision, a prompting, but we're unsure. Something in us stirs, but logic doesn't quite catch up. And in that space of tension, we often reach for certainty. We want a sign, a guarantee, a clear yes or no, but God doesn't always work like that. St. John Paul II deeply understood the struggle of discernment. For him, discernment wasn't simply about making the right choice, it was about being formed by the process of listening. He viewed discernment as a dialogue with God, not just a private mental debate. And intuition, when grounded in prayer and openness, was part of that sacred dialogue. In the United States, we are often taught to act fast, be decisive, move forward. But spiritual discernment asks us to slow down, to sit with discomfort, to let intuition simmer, not just spark. It's not about waiting for emotional certainty, but about noticing what brings peace, what draws us into truth, what invites us into love, even if it's difficult. When you've had to choose whether to forgive someone who deeply hurt you, that's discernment. When you felt drawn to downsize or relocate or reconnect with your adult children after years of silence, that's discernment. When your heart tells you it's time to let go of something that no longer aligns with who you are becoming, that too is sacred discernment. John Paul II would urge us not to ignore these moments. He would remind us that every act of discernment is a step toward becoming more human, more free, and more in communion with God's will. He often quoted St. Augustine, "Love and do what you will," not as a license for impulse, but as an invitation. If we are rooted in love, our desires begin to align with God's. Intuition, then, is not selfish or aimless. It is a quiet nudge toward wholeness, toward the path we were always meant to walk, the one God has been whispering to us through every chapter of our lives. There's a particular ache that comes with age, the weight of looking back, not just at what we did, but what we didn't do. The conversations left unsaid, the courage we didn't muster, the times we felt something deep in our spirit, a pull, a warning, a calling, and ignored it. St. John Paul II never shied away from the subject of regret, but he didn't treat it as a source of shame. Instead, he saw it as a place of redemption, a sacred space where God could speak to us most intimately. Our regrets, especially the ones rooted in ignored intuition, aren't just reminders of failure. They're invitations to listen more closely moving forward. How often do we say, "Something told me not to," or "I knew in my gut I should have"? These aren't just random thoughts. They are echoes of the conscience, what John Paul II called the secret sanctuary where God's voice lingers. When we ignore that sanctuary, we may feel temporary relief, but in time, the silence becomes deafening. and yet regret itself can become a doorway. Many people in their 50s, 60s, and beyond begin to recognize patterns, the ways they've dismissed their own knowing or the consequences of silencing their inner voice to please others. And through those realizations, something powerful can happen. A return to the self, a return to God. John Paul II was a pope of mercy. He believed that our past, no matter how marked by missteps, could be transformed. But transformation starts with honesty, and intuition plays a vital role in that honesty. It helps us reconnect with what we knew was right, even when we didn't follow through. It humbles us. It teaches us to listen more carefully the next time. If you carry regret, you're not alone. But don't let it harden you. Let it open you. Let it teach you to honor the voice you once ignored, because that voice, the one you're hearing again now, is still speaking, and it's still full of grace. We often think of intuition as something abstract, a mysterious feeling or passing thought. But St. John Paul II, in his theology of the body, reminded us that the human body is not a machine or a shell. It is sacred, expressive, and deeply connected to the soul. In other words, your body doesn't just carry intuition, it reveals it. Have you ever felt tension in your chest before a hard conversation or a deep exhale after finally telling the truth? Have you ever felt a lightness when something felt right, even if it made no logical sense? Those aren't coincidences. They are the body's way of joining in the divine conversation. For adults in mid and later life, the body becomes more honest. We lose some of our youthful ability to override or ignore its cues. Our nervous system starts speaking louder through fatigue, anxiety, restlessness, or peace. And when paired with prayerful reflection, these sensations can guide us with startling clarity. John Paul II taught that we are not spirits trapped in flesh. We are embodied souls. Our feelings, especially when they arise in deep stillness or moral tension, are not distractions from faith. They are part of it. Your body holds memory, longing, and divine resonance. Your intuition is not just in your mind. It's felt in your muscles, your breath, your gut. This may be especially important for those who grew up in environments where emotions were minimized or where faith was taught as rule-following rather than relationship. You may have learned to doubt your inner life, to disconnect from your bodily cues. But the wisdom of age invites a reconnection, not just to spirituality, but to wholeness. When you feel something rise in your body, peace, resistance, urgency, pause, pray, reflect. Don't rush to label or dismiss it. Sometimes God speaks not through lightning bolts, but through a simple knot in your stomach, or the sudden loosening of your breath. Your body isn't betraying you. It's speaking with you and with God. Not all intuition comes with warmth or peace. Sometimes it feels like warning. A sudden discomfort, a quiet tightening, an unshakable sense that something isn't right. And in those moments, especially when we're older and expected to know better or keep the peace, it can be tempting to push those feelings aside. But St. John Paul II would urge the opposite. Listen, he taught that part of human dignity lies in our ability to discern what is holy and to protect it. That includes the sanctity of your own peace, your values, and the relationships that reflect God's truth. Intuition is often the first line of defense when those things are threatened. It speaks before our minds can fully process. It stirs when something precious is being tested. Have you ever walked into a room and immediately felt unwelcome, though no one said a word? Or sensed manipulation behind someone's charming words? Have you ever felt your energy shift in someone's presence, not from fear, but from spiritual dissonance? That is sacred information. That is God speaking, not through paranoia, but through wisdom. In his writings, John Paul II often emphasized the importance of interior freedom, the ability to respond from the soul, not just react out of habit or pressure. This freedom is built over time, and intuition, especially in spiritually mature adults, becomes a tool for guarding that freedom. It reminds you what matters. It tells you when a line is about to be crossed, even if you can't explain it yet. And yes, it may cost you. Listening to intuition might lead to hard conversations. It might mean saying no when others expect yes. It might mean walking away from something familiar but misaligned. But as you age, the cost of self-betrayal becomes too high. You begin to understand that peace is not the absence of conflict. It's the presence of alignment with God. So trust the warning, trust the whisper, trust the Spirit moving through your discomfort. Sometimes the voice of God isn't there to soothe you, it's there to shield you. And your intuition is how you'll hear it. By now, maybe something has stirred in you. A memory, a moment, a truth long buried. Maybe you're realizing that the voice you've doubted for years was never just a feeling. It was something holy, something given, and it's time to return to it. St. John Paul II believed that every person carries a divine imprint, a spiritual DNA that connects us back to God, even when we feel lost or unworthy. Intuition, then, is not just a survival tool or psychological reflex. It is part of that imprint, a sacred inheritance that grows clearer as we age, if we have the courage to honor it. In the United States, especially among older adults, there is often a tension between spiritual longing and cultural pressure. You've been told to be rational, practical, to move on. But what if, at this stage of life, the invitation is not to move on, but to come back? Back to the voice you knew as a child. Back to the inner space where God's whisper has always been waiting. John Paul II spent his life urging people to embrace their dignity, not because of what they had done, but because of who they were. And your intuition is part of that dignity. It reflects the image of a God who speaks not in riddles, but in resonance. A God who nudges, stirs, and prompts, even through your doubts, especially through your doubts. You don't need to become someone else to hear God. You don't need to change your personality or wait for dramatic signs. You only need to become still, humble, available, and to trust that the voice you hear within, that quiet certainty, that sudden clarity, that deep knowing, is not foolishness. It is faith. And now, as you step into this next season of life, you don't need more information. You need integration. You need to trust that God has already planted within you what you need to follow Him. Your job is not to prove it, but to listen for it, to protect it, to act on it. Your intuition isn't just yours, it's His.